Hello everybody, this is Dumpster Cat. Welcome back to another video. I hope you're doing very well. I myself am doing pretty well. In this video, I'll be presenting to you Seasons Past in Pioneer, a deck that is very near and dear to my heart. A deck that is not entirely figured out or particularly good in the current meta. However, I do love me some toolbox control decks where you could kind of tamper with them, really figure them out to achieve a nice deck that complements the meta very well. And obviously black and green being my favorite colors, and Seasons Past being a card and an archetype that I have been in love with for the entirety of the Pioneer format. I thought I would make this video to educate everybody about how the Seasons Past archetype works, certain cards you want to be looking out for, how it participates in the meta as a whole, and just the different card choices that you want to be making in the deck. And so before we even get into the card selections and how the deck functions as a whole, I would like to mention that although there are many card overlaps that you may see in BGX mid-range decks in Pioneer, this is not a mid-range deck. I know many of my viewers are familiar with mid-range decks and can kind of grasp the meta when it's taken at that perspective. However, this is a control deck. You may see that we're playing 25 lands, which is very uncommon for mid-range decks, and we have a very high curve with very few creatures. We're only running 3 creatures in this deck. And so as such, we are a control deck. We want to be controlling the board, we want to be keeping the board clear of creatures, of any impactful artifacts or enchantments, and we want to be controlling the opponent's hand. And to do so, we need lots of information about the meta as a whole, what decks we're playing up against, as early as turn 1 or 2, and we want to play ahead, play for the long game, because we have the late game inevitability of being able to loop Seasons Past with Dark Petition over and over again to gain a massive amount of value in the late game. And so if we're able to get to the late game, then we could succeed against any deck in the meta. And so the deck operates off of 2 cards. You could call it a combo of sorts, where we have Dark Petition. This is mainly 90% of the time it's going to be finding your Seasons Past, and then you'll be playing a 3 mana spell, or 1 mana spell, 2 mana spell thereafter. Dark Petition has many functions for the deck. First off, it allows us to have a toolbox strategy where we have lots of 1-ofs. As you could see, we're playing lots of obviously 3-drop 1-ofs because they work very well with the spell mastery part of Dark Petition. And we're playing certain other 1-ofs such as Invoke Despair, Kalidas, even March of Wretched Sorrow, or Professor Onyx, where we have, again, a toolbox deck where we could find certain elements of the deck that lend themselves very well in the current situation, against, say, an aggro deck. We obviously like Fatal Pushes, Murderous Riders, Extinction Events, Languishes. Whereas if we're playing against a control or mid-range deck, we may want to Thoughtseize. Liliana the Veil it has been a big upgrade to this deck in being able to control the board and your opponent's hand, and it's just a perfect card to get off of Dark Petition, and being able to cast it thereafter is just so much more impactful. And so the way the kind of quote-unquote combo works is that you'll cast your Dark Petition on turn 5, say, and then you'll grab up a Seasons Past. Perhaps you're going to use the Spell Mastery mana if you have it on, again, like a 3-drop, 1-drop, something like that. And then the turn after, you'll play your 6th land, and then you'll cast Seasons Past, being able to get back all of the interaction that you've cast on, the first 5 turns of the game, including the Dark Petition. You'll shuffle Seasons Past, or I guess you put Seasons Past on the bottom of your library after you finish casting it, and then since you have the Dark Petition back in your hand, plus 4 plus other cards in your hand that you've cast during the beginning to mid-game, mid parts of the game, you'll be able to just continually cycle your Seasons Past and Dark Petitions to gain essentially an infinite loop where you're accruing lots and lots of card advantage. We have a plethora of different types of spells that can attack certain cards in different ways. So of course we have the very stock 4 Fatal Push, 4 Thoughtseize that we see in BGX mid-range decks. We also have the premier 2-drops in the form of 4 Abrupt Decay and 2 Assassin's Trophy. Now, I know in typical mid-range decks we typically want to be playing 3 to 4 Assassin's Trophy and less Abrupt Decays. However, in this deck, because we are controlling, we want this deck struggles against aggressive decks and aggressive creatures, and so having the early game removal in the form of obviously Abrupt Decay is going to be very important. In addition to that, Assassin's Trophy being able to ramp your opponents is quite ineffective against this or with this deck. In BGX we could kind of, in BGX mid-range we could kind of play around that with our card advantage creatures and more efficient forms of card advantage. But however, in this deck we really want to be playing the most efficient, most versatile removal spells that we have. And Assassin's Trophy just kind of doesn't quite fit in that perfectly. And so that's why I'm opting to go for the full 4 Decay Push Thoughtseize and then just the 2 Trophy. Moving on to the 3-drops, we have quite a variety of different 3-drops. Obviously, starting with the Planeswalkers, Liliana of the Veil. I know many people have been obviously slotting this into Rakdos mid-range, even Greasefang, and then obviously with me, many other content creators such as KO Diamonds. We've been playing it in BGX mid-range. I think she is great in those decks. However, I do believe that she's quite underexplored in these more control decks. And additionally, I think that she slots in very well in these control decks. She is obviously a resource denial card that, at face value, is going to be very good at controlling the opponent's board and the opponent's hand. And so, given the nature of, the anatomy of how Liliana works, we want to be using lots of card advantage to kind of negate her downsides. And, this being a Seasons Past deck, we are able to get around that very easily. We do kind of have to be afraid, or at least be wary of, not discarding our Seasons Past, not discarding certain 1-ups that we want to keep in the deck, or, shuffle back into the deck. So we do have to be wary about those things. But overall, Liliana is just a great new tech for the deck. Liliana the Last Hope, to a lesser extent, is very nice. I like having access to her in this deck, just for the simple reason of being able to find her off of Dark Petition and then casting her thereafter. She is a great card against aggro, obviously, against mid-range, and even against control decks. Being able to buy cards back is very relevant. And then you could even just sit back, keep on plussing her, controlling your opponent's board in their hand, and then just ultimate her to win the game. That's come up very frequently. Moving on with the 3-drops, Go Blank. I love having access to this card in the main deck. Being able to mind rot your opponent is very relevant in this meta. Having access to a plethora amount of these 2-for-1 cards is very nice. Plus being able to exile your opponent's graveyard is just the cherry on top. And so Go Blank is kind of premier, I do believe. We do play the 2 extra in the sideboard to make the playset for the 75. We additionally have Murder Strider or Swift End being a very flexible removal spell, being a creature that can quite often win us the game, just due to how slow this deck is and how good we are at denying our opponents of resources. Kind of along those lines, Nighthawk Scavenger is probably the best threat we have. that we can get off of Dark Petition and cast it thereafter with Spell Mastery. This card is great against a lot of aggro decks. This deck's main weakness is very aggressive decks that attack our life total very quickly, and so Nighthawk Scavenger slots in against those matchups very nicely with the lifelink, with the evasion, and then the Death Touch being really nice. Just being able to trade 1-for-1 with your opponent's creatures is very relevant, and then can be a humongous beater in the late game. Given that we're interacting with our opponent so much, we're putting a lot of cards in the graveyard. And then to round off our 3-drops, we do have one of the Celestis. This is a relatively new addition to the deck as well. I like having at least one ramp piece. Other people have played Cultivate in this slot. Cultivate is pretty interesting because you do get to play Cultivate on turn 3, and then you guarantee your Dark Petition on your turn 4 because you have obviously the land that goes into play, and then the 5th land in your hands to play the Dark Petition. However, I do like the sort of mid-range or card advantage aspects of the Celestis, being able to consistently loot away certain cards that aren't relevant in the matchup is surprisingly very relevant in this deck, given that we're playing so much creature removal. Against control decks or even mid-range decks, those may not be relevant. And so the Celestis looting effect is very nice, and the gain life is, or the life gain is very nice as well against those aggressive decks, like I mentioned. Now, moving on to the bigger cards, the 4, 5, and 6 drops. Obviously, I touched on the Dark Petitions being very versatile in this deck. I really like the split in the 4-drop slot of 2 Extinction Events, 1 Languish, and 1 Cletus. Cletus is just an all-star in this deck. You could even go up to playing 2 if you want. Given that we have so much removal, in the 1, 2, and 3 drops, it's just, very intuitive to have Cletus in the deck. Even if you play against a control deck, Fatal Pushing like a Shark Typhoon token is going to be very relevant, and gain you a lot of card advantage and board presence, which is nice. And then obviously he's just beastly against the aggro decks and the control decks, the mid-range decks. So Cletus obviously a mainstay in the deck. I love having access to 2 Extinction Events in the main deck. Event is a premier card against Mono Green Devotion, a premier card against any aggressive deck that we come across, so Extinction Event is very nice. And then of course Languish is just a premier mass removal spell that we have access to in black. Invoke Despair is one of my personal favorites. I love having access to Invoke Despair as almost a finisher, to be honest. I've had lots of people just concede to Invoke Despair once I cast it. It just being a massive swing in your favor, being able to get multiple threats off of your opponent's table. This has become even more relevant with the printing of Leyline Binding into the format. Being able to get rid of that on, say, like a Liliana of the Veil or a Cletus, something like that, is very relevant in this deck. And so Invoke Despair slots in very nicely. Same thing with Professor Onyx, probably the most premier threat we have, or at least game finisher we have in this deck. Professor Onyx works very well at accruing as card advantage, being able to end the game very quickly with her Magecraft ability. With the plethora of instants and sorceries we have in the deck is very nice, and then obviously her -3 is going to be very relevant against creature or mid-range strategies where they want to be attacking us. Her -3 is very relevant in that situation, and then even with her +1, although we do lose the 1 life, we do get some added advantage by putting the rest of the cards in our graveyard, working alongside Seasons Past very nicely. Now, moving on to explaining the mana base. We do have 25 lands because we are a control deck. We want to be hitting our land drops as much as possible, as frequently as possible. We do have a lot of black mana, or a lot of black cards in this deck, so we want to be skewing our mana base a bit more to black, so that's why you only see 1 forest in the deck, 1 Fabled Passage for added synergies with Seasons Past, because Fabled Passage and Field of Ruin, and I guess any other card, land card, do count as a zero-costed card that you could get off of Seasons Pass, which is very nice. I really love this mana base for a few reasons. I do believe it's the best Castle Locthwain deck in the format, which is very relevant against the plethora amount of Rakdos midrange we see in the meta right now. I love having access to the triple Field of Ruin. I have been honestly thinking about going up to a fourth, taking out the Fable Passage, just because Field of Ruin is so relevant against so many different cards. I do think Field of Ruin is a bit underexplored in the format right now. Being able to get rid of Nykthoses, get rid of any creature lands, any utility lands, and fix your mana at the same time is just really nice. And a lot of Pioneer decks right now are not playing that many basic lands, and so Field of Ruin plays very nicely, especially against the 3+ color decks where you're able to destroy certain lands and keep your opponents off to certain colors. So Field of Ruin, very nice in this deck, and they obviously just add a benefit of being able to get it back with Seasons Past. Other includes, we don't have any Blooming Marshes because we're a very slow deck, obviously. We have Deathcap Glade in place of that. We do have access to Hissing Quagmire and have the Eye Tyrant. I love this split right now. You could even play an extra Quagmire just because this deck is very slow. We don't care too much about the ETB tapped clause, and we care even more about the Death Touch clause, where we're going to be playing a very defensive game, and Death Touch kind of enables this card to be a removal spell of sorts, whereas Have the Eye Tyrant is more of an attacker / finisher. So I really like the split right now. I do think it is correct to still keep the Hive in, even though we're a very defensive deck, and Hissing Quagmire lends itself better to being a defensive card. I still like the offensive capabilities that Hive offers, and you could still play this as a defensive card, as is. Takenuma has, fewer synergies in this deck than in other BGX midrange decks. However, I really love it just because it's a very low opportunity costed card to play, and because the Liana of the Veil is so important to this deck. Being able to get her back is really nice. Being able to get back a Professor Onyx when we don't have the Seasons Pass to get her back, or any of the other cards back, is really nice. Any of our creatures getting back is obviously good as well. Kind of good reasoning for this card. It's just pretty much auto include in most black decks. I just realized now I did not touch on March of Wretched Sorrow. This is relatively new tech as well. I love this card. It's been performing very well, obviously great against the aggressive decks. Being able to kill a creature and then get a nice life gain boost is surprisingly very crucial for this deck. We really want to be playing a nice tempo control strategy where we're using our life total as a resource very efficiently. And so March of Wretched Sorrow serves two purposes in that way, of getting rid of a creature and getting us life to prolong the game even more until we're able to get a Seasons Pass and just repeat the whole process of the game to really kind of punish our opponent. Now, moving on to the sideboard, we have a lot of one-ofs and a lot of cards that you may have seen in traditional BGX midrange decks. Obviously those ones being Elder Gargaroth, Grafdigger's Cage, Stamping Sphere, Runestone, and then Noxious Grasp and Go Blank, and then to a lesser extent Shuffle as well, I suppose. These 9 cards probably don't need so much explanation. Elder Gargaroth comes in a variety of matchups, being great against aggro, decent against midrange, and then nice against control, and obviously great against Phoenix as well. Chevel is really nice against aggro. This, as I said earlier, this deck's main weakness is the aggressive decks that want to be killing us very quickly, and so Chevel kind of serves a dual purpose of being a card advantage card being a life gain card, and then just being a 1/3 death touch that if we need to, it can just block a creature without gaining any previous value, and then it's still being very good. So I love Chevo in this deck. And then the other cards, pretty self-explanatory. Could even play a second Runestone in place of the Stamping Sphere, but us being a Dark Petition deck, being able to have a toolbox of cards is very nice, and so I like having access to the Damping Sphere, at least somewhere in the 75 in this deck. Moving on, we do have access to more 3-drops, black 3-drops that is, in the form of Necromentia and Witch's Vengeance. Necromentia does not get boarded in very much, however when it does, it's going to be very impactful because we do get to search it off of Dark Petition, and you know, obviously, quite often this card is going to be game winning because it's going to be taking away, say like a Jeskai Ascendancy or a Lotus Field or Peerings the Abyss, something like that, and so this card is very relevant in certain niche matchups. Witch's Vengeance, on the other hand, comes in a variety of matchups, obviously being a great hoser against the aggressive tribal decks, such as humans and spirits, and you know, even soldiers I've been seeing come up recently, sometimes merfolk, and so Witch's Vengeance is very nice against those decks. And additionally, we do have access to Thought Distortion, which is really, really good against control and combo, and even to a lesser extent mid-range. I love Thought Distortion. It's a very powerful effect that we get to have access to in this control deck, We additionally have 2 Tireless Tracker and 1 Garrick. These coming in against the mid-range and control matchups, obviously Tracker being a house in the mid-range matchups. You know, if a Rakdos mid-range player sees a Tireless Tracker plus like a Fabled Passage or even a Field of Ruin thereafter, then they know that the opponent, meaning us, is going to be getting a lot of card advantage. Being a threat, being a source of card advantage is just very nice in this deck against those mid-range and control matchups. Same thing with Garrick. Garrick has been a very nice all-star for me in the mid-range and control matchups. Being able to flood the board with creatures is very relevant. Being able to destroy creatures is very relevant, draw cards, and then quite often you'll just plus, or I guess 0 this for a turn or two. You could even kill one of your own wolf tokens, and then just -6 it to gain the emblem, and then you can attack with, you know, any variety of your creatures, the tokens, and then even some of your man lands as well to finish off the game. Garrick is just a very nice include into the deck as a whole. Okay, now that we've gone over the card selection and the choices behind those, we want to be now delving into how to play the deck, what you want to be doing in the games, and then how to finish up the games as a whole. So, to do that, we're going to be playing a game here, a pseudo game here, I guess. In your opening hand, you really want to be seeing a nice spread of interaction and lands. So this hand is a bit slow. You only have 2 lands. However, you know, depending on if you're on the play or if you're on the draw, kind of goes into the decision of keeping or mulliganing as well. And so I would say if we're on the draw, I would definitely keep this. On the play, be a bit iffy. If, say, this was game 2 against an aggressive deck, however, I would definitely keep this hand just because it has a plethora of removal spells and wrath effects and has a nice finisher. So let's keep this hand. I suppose we're on the draw in that scenario. And so now we could play this Hissing Quagmire tapped. Then we could say, you know, Thoughtseize our opponent, see what they're up to. Unfortunately, in this scenario, I'll have to say goodbye to a Fatal Push. We could play a tapped Castle Locthwain, then pass the turn. Now, turn 3, we obviously play our land. Want to be hitting our lands in each turn. And now we have, say, the decision of if our opponent has multiple creatures on the board, we quite often will just want to keep the board clear, push one, decay the other, and all be said and good. However, if our opponent has 1 or 0 creatures on the board, Liliana of the Veil will be the greater, or the better, more fitting card to play. Being able to edict 1 creature is going to be far better than fatal pushing, or just removing the creature with a removal spell, because you're going to be having the Liliana, as a planeswalker, stay on the board after, and that is a massive swing. So let's say in this scenario, they have 1 creature, and then we're able to edict them, and then, go to our next turn. Now, we have a bit of a mess up here. We did not draw our 4th land, so what do we do now? In this part of the game, where, we're light on lands, we want to be controlling the board as much as possible. We don't want to be worrying about, too much about our opponent's hand. We just want to be, clearing the board as much as possible. We want to take as little combat damage as possible, and we want to keep our life total as high as possible. And so in that case, we could just plus with our Liliana, say probably get rid of just the Invoke Despair or even the Languish. Here I would probably, depending on the matchup, I would probably just get rid of the Languish, because we already have removal, and we really, although Invoke Despair is a 5-drop, it is a very good swing, draws us more cards, and so once we're able to get to our 5th land, Invoke Despair is going to be that much more useful. So next, let's go to the next turn. Okay, here we drew our 4th land, which is very nice. We could plus our Liliana, say get rid of a Fatal Push, or if we would have used it, and then pass the turn. Now, in this scenario, we really want to be taking care of the man lands, or the utility lands. So Hissing Quagmire is a great blocker, and Castle Lochthorn is obviously a great card advantage engine. However, in this scenario, if your opponent, say, attacks with a creature, a really big creature, that's gonna, say, take us like 5+ damage. Although blocking with the Hissing Quagmire may seem very intuitive, given that we're light on lands, we probably don't want to block with the Hissing Quagmire. We don't want to use it because we really need the lands, especially being on a control deck where we want to hit our lands very frequently. We just cannot block with Hissing Quagmire. Same with attacking. Attacking is going to be very risky in this scenario. You rarely ever attack with your Hissing Quagmires until extremely late in the game, where you have already accrued a lot of card advantage, and it's kind of just nonsensical to attack with it. So in this scenario, say let's just pass the turn and move on to the next turn. Just not do anything. We're just keep on drawing removal spells. Could even, discard, keep our Liliana in play, keep on, playing throughout the game. And now we come to a decision of plussing with the Liliana or minusing, doing her edict effect or ultimating. So quite often, the games will come to basically going all in on your Liliana of the Veil. And so, because we're a very, very slow deck with very, very few threats, we want to be very, very efficient and very thoughtful how we use our Liliana. And quite often, instead of using her loyalty abilities kind of nonchalantly, we want to be very critical of how we use her loyalty abilities. And so quite often we will not ultimate her. We will not edict her when we already have removal in hand, and we will be protecting her at all costs. So in this scenario, we'll just plus and pass the turn. Now, we're still not drawing our lands, which is a bit unfortunate. However, we did draw our Celestis, which is nice, ramps us, although a land would have been better, allowing us to cast our Invoke Despair. That's okay. We could continue to plus with our Liliana, and then pass the turn. Now, at this point, we could either, depending on what our opponent did, what the stage in the game we're at with them, you know, at this stage in the game, given our slow start, if we were against an aggressive deck, then it would have been quite difficult to get through. However, if we're against a slower deck, then I would say we're probably advantaged at this point, especially if we still have our Liliana of the Veil in play. And so basically, the theory behind Liliana of the Veil is just keep on pressing her, and then playing, Invoke Despair, gaining lots of card advantage, and then just keep on passing the turn until you're able to, gain even more card advantage, get even more lands onto the board, and eventually draw into your Dark Petition and or Seasons Past, get all these cards in your graveyard back into your hand, and then repeat the process. And then quite often you will be winning with your man lands, or with a planeswalker such as Liliana the Last Hope, Professor Onyx, or although Liliana the Veil cannot directly kill your opponent, quite often they'll just concede to her in response to a very impactful ultimate. And so that concludes this deck tech video for Seasons Past 101. I hope you learned more about the deck. I hope I was able to educate you a bit. Let me know in the comments how I did, how you feel with the deck now compared to before. Seasons Past is a deck that is very unique. It operates off of a single card that kind of makes the deck itself and different from any other deck that you could find in Magic. And so I love Seasons Past, I love Dark Petition, I love the toolbox element of this deck, being able to basically have the games be puzzle piece, or puzzles, with each card being a puzzle piece, and being able to put all those cards together to form the most efficient, most interactive game with all the pieces, and to form the complete the puzzle, get it together, and find the most effective way of winning the game. This is an extremely slow deck, so I would advise to not play it if you do not like slow decks. This is a very controlling deck. It kills even slower than, say, blue-white control. I would say it's probably the slowest deck in the format. And so if Burn ever gets popular, or more popular, I would advise probably not to play this deck. Or if you do, you're going to be wanting to play a lot of collective brutalities, and perhaps some 3-mana creatures such as Courser of Crufix. I like going with the low amount of creatures in other Seasons Past builds. They play creatures such as Courser of Crufix, obviously I just mentioned, Tireless Tracker, the 3-mana Nissa that could flip into a Planeswalker, cards like that, and even Grimflayer in the 2-drop slot. However, I just like being very clean and just being a control deck. The creatures do allow the deck to be quicker. However, I do believe that this deck is best when it's the slowest. And so that's kind of a double-edged sword, in the sense that you're not going to be able to really destroy the more aggressive decks more efficiently. However, you'll still be able to win against any other slow matchup and pretty much any other mid-range matchup, unless they're able to accrue tremendous amounts of value in the early game. And so, with that being said, I really hope you enjoyed the video. This is kind of a different style of video. I do like these more informative videos, however, more kind of educational videos about these more niche decks that I myself am personally invested in and very interested in. And so I hope you could feel the same way, or kind of see that perspective. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you have a very nice day, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.